All right. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our live chat talking about COVID info and vaccine hesitancy in Black and Brown communities. Today we have awesome doctors, Dr. Milton Mills and Dr. Priyamvada Naik, here to talk about everything. So yeah, pretty much, did y'all want to like just talk a little bit about your profession and a little bit about yourselves before we start? How about you, Dr. Naik? How about you start?
Uh-oh.
Oh no, can you hear me? All right,
Priya?
y'all. We're having a little bit of internet difficulties, but I'm sure Dr. Naik
hear you,
will.
but I can't tell if you're asking me or
Can you say that one more time?
Okay, so
I'm
you're
only hearing
frozen.
every other word you're saying.
Okay, well, maybe if you leave and
So
come
I
back
can only
in.
hear every other word.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Every other word. Okay.
So
Um,
yeah, why don't we get started with Dr. Mills and then we're gonna work this thing out with Dr. Naik.
Okay. All right, Priya. I was expecting you to be on the hot seat first, but okay. I'm Dr. Milton Mills. I am trained as an internal medicine physician and critical care specialist, and I guess my reason for being in medicine is to help people understand the relationship between how they eat and live and how well we do in life with respect to our health and our risk for chronic disease and the risk for dementia as we age and losing functionality. And I have been at or near the front lines of this COVID epidemic since it started, in that I work at a tertiary care hospital that consistently makes the U.S. News and World Report top 100 hospitals in the country. And so we've seen a lot of COVID, and I believe Priya will, or Dr. Naik, excuse me, will probably echo similar sentiments. Last year, when the epidemic was at its height, it was one of the most harrowing experiences I've had since I became a physician. I'd never seen so many people sick and dying, and I mean dying fast. You start your shift and somebody is in their room and they're awake, alert, reasonably stable, and then within hours they are uh, essentially suffocating before your eyes. They're turning blue. They can't breathe, and eventually they will need ventilatory support, and sadly, oftentimes had to pass away, or ended up passing away. Excuse me, and they had to do this by themselves because of the risk of COVID. Um, Family members weren't allowed to be with them to lend them the support we all need when we are being stressed. And meanwhile, we as doctors, instead of being able to have that immediate interaction with our patients, we've got to dress up in essentially spacesuits. Again, fully covered, shields, the N95 masks, gowns, head coverings, because of the risk, again, of transmitting the infectious agent. So it's been a very, very troubling and disturbing experience to have to live through. And so having seen the differences that having vaccines available have made in terms of reducing risk, reducing severity of disease, um, has been just, I don't know, a gift from heaven, for lack of a better expression. And that's why it is so troubling to me when I see people falling prey to a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that is circulating on the web, that is deliberately designed to confuse people, to make them turn away from therapies that are potentially life-saving. And it's all designed to number one, again, attack certain communities and destabilize society in general. So that's kind of my intro. I'll turn it over to Priya now, or Dr. Naik. I gotta remember to be formal.
I don't blame you. It looks like she hasn't popped back on yet. She's probably having some internet issues. So should we just move on to our first question, and hopefully she can hop back on back to answer it?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm hoping so. So thanks again, Dr. Milton Mills, for joining us for this discussion. You know, you're one of my favorite people in the world, and
Well, thank
I'm
you.
always so happy when I'm
And
able
you're having
to.
the same problem with me I'm having with Dr. Naik, because we're personal friends. We're on a first name basis, and
yeah. Yes, Dr. Mills, Dr. Milton Mills. And so, you know, I wanted to, with this particular panel discussion, I wanted to start at the beginning, like at ground zero, you know, and just work our way forward. Because what I've been seeing from folks on the internet is that there are folks who have opinions about the virus and opinions about the vaccine, and they don't even know what a virus or a vaccine is.
Hello.
And that is very clear from some of the things that they say. And so I was hoping that we could just start at ground zero and you could just explain what is a virus and how do viruses affect the human body?
Sure. Well, I just have to get this statement in because a friend of mine said this to me years ago, and it's highly accurate. When it comes to opinions, he said opinions are like rear ends. Everybody has one, and none of them smell very good. So,
facts.
So we got to be. I mean, we got to be careful of that. Now, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a former senator, also had an important expression about opinions. He said that everyone is entitled to their opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts, because facts exist independently and are verifiable. And how you feel about that is your opinion, but the facts are the facts. So, yes, viruses are very small infectious organisms that contain DNA sequences and or RNA sequences that can, and typically they are able to enter a cell, and the DNA or RNA sequences within the virion or viral particle can then commandeer that cell's intracellular machinery and instruct the cell to start cranking out copies of the virus. It basically takes over the cell and tells the cell, start making copies, not of, say, proteins to make new skin or whatever the cell had been doing formerly, but now to start making new copies of this virus. And depending on which type of cells the viral particle can infect and the body's response to it, that can often show up as illness. And so for instance, respiratory viruses, cold viruses, which belong most frequently to a family called adenoviruses, typically infect the upper and respiratory tract. They get into the cells within our respiratory tract, and they can cause the cells to start producing more mucus, to not perform their normal jobs adequately. And then as a result, the symptoms that people can feel are they've got suddenly clogged sinuses, runny noses. If it occurs lower in the respiratory tract, they can get swelling of the respiratory tree such that breathing becomes more difficult. And again, if the fluid buildup is in the lungs, it prevents the air sacs in the lungs from adequately exchanging gas, getting rid of carbon dioxide and taking in oxygen. And as a result, the person starts to essentially become hypoxic, have a low oxygen state, which makes them very fatigued, very tired. And ultimately, if it's not reversed, they can die because, again, in the really severe cases, you don't get enough oxygen in to meet your body's needs, and as a result, the body stops functioning properly. And that's kind of a very simplified overview of how viruses attack. There's Dr. Naik. Dr. Naik, can you hear us?
I'm so sorry.
Oh, no.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
You're doing fine. It's a little
Can
laggy.
you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dr. Naik, are you using Chrome or
what I think I'm gonna do? No, I'm on Safari, but I think it's my iPad. So let me go grab my laptop, and I'm gonna try that. I'm so sorry for all the discussions.
no problem.
It happens.
I'll keep riffing until we get you back. Okay. All right. Brenda, you are absolutely correct that a huge part of the problem that we're seeing is that people are offering opinions on things that they absolutely do not understand, and they don't really have any true understanding of how the body works. So one of the things I think would be really important for us to talk about is how our immune system, what it is, what it does in terms of what its job is in terms of keeping us alive, and then how it does that. Because when people understand that, then they can begin to realize that vaccines are actually designed to train our immune system to be able to respond to infection with, a virus, bacteria, a fungus, before that infection can get out of hand and kill us. So let me try to do a sort of a quick overview of so-called herd immunity, and then we can get into more detail on exactly how the immune system responds to an infection. Because people have, made some very glib and very inaccurate comments about, we should just let the virus spread until we reach herd immunity, and then we'll all be protected. Right. And they, again, have no idea what they're talking about. So, in kind of a quick and dirty explanation, what is herd immunity? Well, you guys are younger than I am, and hopefully by the time you started learning world and American history, a lot of the lies that I had been taught as a kid had been sort of revised, and the truth had come out. When I was growing up, we were given the story that, Columbus came over here as this kind of great benefactor, looking for spices and gold, and then he was followed by other European nations. And because of their superior technology and greater, intellect, they conquered the people indigenous to the New World, and essentially colonized and took over these areas and brought European civilization to the Americas. Okay, so the reason they were able to establish themselves was because they and their culture was superior. Well, it turns out that was a truckload of equine excrement. The real reason that they were able to so easily invade and ultimately establish themselves in the Americas was because they brought with them from Europe diseases that the peoples indigenous to the Americas had never seen before. The things that we tend to consider routine childhood illnesses like measles, mumps, chickenpox, and so forth, those diseases had been so well established within both Africa and Europe for so long that they had already established herd immunity. Well, how did they do that? Well, when whenever a new infectious agent enters the population, because we are all individually different, we all have different immune systems that are genetically somewhat different. And so that means that you will have a certain part of the population that is extremely vulnerable to that infectious agent. Others will be mildly vulnerable. Others will be moderately resistant, and some will be very resistant. And so what happens is when a new infectious agent comes in, it kills off everybody who's very susceptible to it. Mm. Then there's a portion of people who get sick from it, but are able to eventually overcome it. And so over time, within that population, you essentially kill off all the people who are so sensitive to that infectious agent that they die from it. And what you're left with are people who are, more or less resistant to it, can get the infection, but their immune system is able to eventually mount an effective response, and they then get well again. And that whole sequence from exposure to clearance of the infectious agent from your system takes about 2 weeks. And because, again, these viruses have been present in European areas for centuries, you now had a population that was able to essentially get the illness, get sick, but eventually overcome it. Well, that was not true of the indigenous people in the Americas. They had never seen these diseases, and therefore, when the Europeans brought these diseases to the Americas, it killed millions of them, and it essentially depopulated North, South America, and the Caribbean. And it was basically the dying off of indigenous people from European diseases that paved the way for European colonization of the New World. But so essentially that's what herd immunity is. Herd immunity is when a virus or I should say an infectious agent enters the population, kills off everybody that's susceptible, and then the people that it leaves are the people who are resistant enough to get the disease and overcome it, or not even really become sick from it. Okay? Well, back in the 19th century, I can't remember the researcher's name, but this guy discovered that one of the more virulent and problematic diseases people were still having a problem with was smallpox. But there was a much less troublesome disease for humans called cowpox. It was actually a disease of cows. And when humans got it, they would get kind of lesions on their skin, but they really wouldn't get sick from it. And this doctoral researcher realized that there was probably enough similarity between cowpox and smallpox that if he inoculated someone with the cowpox virus, they would make antibodies against it that would actually also work against smallpox. And that's how the therapies of vaccines were born. The idea is you take a piece of a virus or something closely related to it that will teach the immune system to make neutralizing antibodies without exposing the person to the risk of overwhelming disease and death. And so you're training the immune system to be ready for the infection so that it never gets established. And it looks like Dr. Naik is here, so I'm going to let her come in and add anything I might have left out or expand upon it and give us her views as well.
So we were just talking about. Yes. Perfect. Yay, we're so happy to have you back. Dr. Mills, I think, did a great job of describing what a virus is and how it affects the body. I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to add to that, or if we could sort of transition into the next question, which is related.
Well, the only thing I was going to add, I mean, obviously he did a phenomenal job. The analogy that I use to help people understand vaccines is Think of a fire station. When you call 911 because your house is burning, what you do not want to hear on the other end is, oh, hang on, we need to train our firefighters. Right? That is the last thing you want to hear. What you want to know is that they're sitting there waiting, ready and trained to fight the fire. And so that's what vaccines do. They train our body, they train our B cells to fight off a disease so that when we actually see the disease, we can recognize it and ramp up the speed at which we can attack it.
All right. Well, you're getting ahead of us. You're getting ahead of us, Dr. Naik. And by the way, Dr. Mills, it was Edward Jenner. He was the person, who discovered smallpox and that the cowpox could be used to create the vaccine. So Edward Jenner.
Thank you for adding that. And can I just say, it was Lewis Lattimore who actually invented the electric light bulb and not Thomas Edison. That I just had to throw it in there.
Yeah, let's set the record straight.
Thank you for that. Okay, great. So on to our next question. So can you describe the COVID-19 virus and what it does to the body?
Priya, why don't you take that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So COVID-19 is the disease that is caused by SARS-CoV-2. You'll also hear people call it SARS-CoV-2. And essentially, like all coronaviruses, it has genetic material surrounded by protein coat, and it's got little spikes in it. Those are called the spike protein. And what that does is the spike protein binds to receptors in our body called the ACE2 receptor. We have them in a couple different organs like our lungs, our kidneys, things like that. And it can do anything from causing mild cold-like symptoms. Not surprising, we do know that some coronaviruses cause the common cold. So it can cause just mild, chills, aches, maybe some fevers, stuffy nose, cough, things like that. However, it can cause more severe disease, and that's the concern we have, because unlike viruses like the flu, for example, we're seeing far more lung damage related to this disease. So it can cause something called ARDS. And for anyone who's watching, as you guys know, you were kindly invited me to come talk about COVID-19 and its effects in Black and Brown communities. And the entire first hour is dedicated to what ARDS is. So I refer folks to that. But essentially, it's a lung injury. It's caused by starting out with inflammation. The inflammation is a reaction to the virus. As the virus attacks the body, the immune system comes in and tries to repair it, and sometimes goes a little bit overboard, and eventually results in scarring. The scary thing about COVID-19 is that we see two different studies now have shown, one at the beginning of the pandemic and one a few months ago, published in Lancet, show that if you get sick enough to end up in a hospital, you have a 1 in 2 chance of having other organs fail. Your most common organ is going to be the kidney, and then lungs are next, and after that, systemic things. So like your circulatory system, you may not be able to mount a normal blood pressure, things like that. And this is, of course, what we're seeing in the hospital, right? We're seeing things like people ending up on ventilators and things like that. The downstream effects of that severe illness is when you end up on a ventilator, if you have the flu and you end up on the ventilator, you might be on the vent for like a week. The average amount of time someone stays on a vent for COVID is about 21, 22 days. If you've been on the ventilator for 22 days, you are going to have a lot of atrophy of your muscles. So you're going to develop something called critical illness myopathy or critical illness polyneuropathy. So you're not just coming off the ventilator and then jumping out of bed and ready to go, right? You're going to need rehab. You might actually have to go to a rehab facility. You may be on dialysis. As I said, 50% of people have another organ fail them. And by the way, these studies are massive studies. These are 800,000 people that they've looked at in multiple different centers. So this is well established. So the concern that we also have is if you have mild disease, what we're seeing is something called long COVID or long haul COVID. And we're struggling to figure out who is going to get that. We don't have a good way of predicting who is going to have the mild cold-like symptoms and then be totally fine, and who's going to have the mild cold-like symptoms but then have brain fog, have weakness, lose memory, have chills, have aches, have shortness of breath that's persistent. What's even more challenging is when we try to do the traditional tests that we would do to establish how bad it is, we do not have good testing for this. So we don't even have a great definition for long COVID yet. All we can say is that it's anybody who has symptoms that seem to persist more than 6 months. But we don't have good diagnostic criteria or anything. There are certain things that we have advanced in. So the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, they have actually characterized long COVID as a disability, and they list a constellation of symptoms on their website that can be considered long COVID. The challenge is figuring out, is this long COVID? Is this all just a consequence of having the ARDS? Because a lot of those symptoms overlap. But we know people we know doctors who 8 months later can't remember how to turn on their computer, all because they had mild COVID 8 months prior. So this is a very, very scary disease for us to see. It's not just that. We also know that when people, and so typically when someone is critically ill in the ICU, and Dr. Mills can speak to this, you can most of the time predict who's going to do badly and who's going to do well. And you can even know when you leave your ICU that night and you're signing out to the doctor taking over for you, you can usually tell them, hey, patient in bed 12 is very unstable. If anyone is going to have a cardiac arrest tonight, it's going to be the patient in bed 12. And that is just not what we're seeing with COVID. The really scary thing about COVID is people can be fine 1 minute and then dead 5 minutes later. So sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just sort of chiming in saying that's very true. And that is what's scary about it. One thing that I do, Dr. Naik mentioned something I think is really important for us to talk about. Maybe not at this point. The two of you as a host will decide where we need to talk about this. But I just got into this discussion again with someone about so-called side effects from vaccines, right? And what a lot of people don't understand is that many of the sort of classic symptoms we associate with being ill are not caused by the thing that's infecting us. It's caused by our immune system's response to it. So take fever, for instance. Everybody understands that when you get in your car and the engine's cold, it doesn't run well, right? But as it warms up, it runs better. And the same thing is true of your body. The warmer our body is up to a point, the better the cells move, the better they're able to do their jobs, which is one of the reasons that when the immune system has to mount a response to an infectious agent, it cranks up your temperature because it wants things working faster. It also doesn't want you expending your energy partying at the club. So it makes you feel like crap. So you sit your butt down and it can use the available energy to cause immune cells to multiply, respond, do what they're supposed to do. So when people have that, the body aches, the fever, the fatigue after getting the vaccine, that's exactly what's supposed to happen because now their immune system has seen this piece of the virus and it is starting to marshal a response to it. And it just wants you to sit and chill until it's done its job. Then you can get up and go do what you got to do. So that does not mean you're having a bad side effect. That means you're having exactly the effects you're supposed to have. Now I know there's somebody out there saying, wait a minute, I didn't have any of that when I got my shot. Does that mean it didn't work? No, because remember, I told you everybody is different. And some people have a more pronounced response than others. So, some people have a very mild response. Others have a more pronounced response. But whatever response you got, like mine was just localized soreness in the arm. That still lets you know my immune system got there, saw what was going on, and said, "Y'all got to get off this corner because it ain't good." Okay.
My immune system is a drama queen. I'm gonna just let y'all know right now. It's just doing the most.
You know, I mean, it's so funny to me because I'll hear people say things like, I trust my immune system. I don't need the vaccine. And I'm like, I trust my immune system too. If I didn't trust my immune system, there would literally be no point in getting vaccinated. The only way a vaccine works is if you have a functioning immune system.
Right. Let's talk about that for just a minute, because this morning, someone said to me, well, I've had 3 friends that tested positive for COVID, and I never tested positive, so I feel like I'm good. And so I asked this person, I said, do you wear your seatbelts when you get in the car? And they're like, of course.
Yep.
I said, have you ever been involved in a rollover accident? And they said, no. I said, but you still put your seatbelt on, right? Because you want the protection. Okay? And the fact of the matter is that, look, I trust my immune system too, because after I went plant-based, never got the flu, ever. People keep coughing my face. I was fine. So I knew just from that my immune system had stepped up. But as Dr. Naik has pointed out brilliantly, COVID is a different animal. And it is much worse than most of the common things that we experience from the, year in and year out. Much more virulent, much more damaging to our tissues. So my point is this, again, to use the car analogy, I want a car that has seatbelts, airbags, and a crumple zone, plus a rollover bar in the roof, okay? Because all those things maximize my chances of surviving a crash were I to get into one. And even when I have all those things, I'm still not going out drinking a 6-pack and driving 90 miles an hour in the snow. Okay? So, we need those multiple layers of protection, and especially with something as dangerous as the COVID virus.
Right.
My goodness. Wow. So, like, I just wanted to take things again back to the basics and ask, what is a pandemic and why is COVID-19 classified as such? Anybody want to take that one?
Do you want to take that, Milton?
Well, I'm going to be honest. I don't know what the technical terms are, but an epidemic is when a certain percentage of a population comes down with an infectious entity at the same time. A pandemic is an epidemic on steroids. It's when it becomes, I think it becomes sort of worldwide, or it spreads beyond your country, your local area, and starts to involve various places around the world. That, because, if you think about the Pan American Games, it's where all of the nations in the Americas participate in their own kind of mini Olympics, and pan just means generalized. And so a pandemic is a generalized epidemic that is affecting multiple places around the world at the same time. And if somebody wants to Google the technical requirements for that, that might be a good idea. But that's generally what it means.
Okay, and so, okay, go on.
I'm sorry. No. I was just going to say there is a WHO definition. So an epidemic is a disease that affects a large number of people within a community, population, or region. And a pandemic is an epidemic that is spread to multiple countries or continents across the world.
Oh, that was pretty accurate.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are specific numbers that you have to actually hit. And that's why it took a little while for the WHO to call it a pandemic. But I don't, off the top of my head, remember what, how many countries is it, how many people, that kind of thing.
But we're definitely there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for that.
Cool. So moving on to our next question. So are things like mask wearing and social distancing really effective measures against transmission of the virus? Why or why not?
Ooh.
Yeah, whoever wants to start.
Oh, how do I want to? Pri, Dr. Naik, if you're ready to jump in, go ahead. I'm trying.
Yeah, so this is not a surprising thing that masks work, right? We use masks all the time in medicine. So if I have a patient that I think might have tuberculosis, I'm wearing an N95 mask because if they cough, those droplets can spread up to about 6 feet. Droplets are big and heavy and they fall at about 6 feet. So I want to make sure that unless I'm physically examining the patient, when I talk to the patient, I back up in the room. I'm wearing my N95 because I want to make sure that the droplets cannot get to me, that kind of thing. So we do know that masks work. They work best if everybody is wearing a mask, not just one person's wearing a mask and everybody else isn't wearing a mask. And it's not just mask, it's eye protection as well, because any infectious droplet can get into your eyes, any mucosal membrane, right? Technically speaking, theoretically, if you had a cut on your arm and it was open and exposed and droplets fell in there, that is a potential source of infection. Is it as likely? It is not as likely as inhaling it. The reason we want people to socially distance, again, comes from droplets and aerosols. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we were focused mostly on droplets. And the difference between those is literally size. So when we think of a droplet, and this is confusing to people because people will go, oh, the virus is XYZ number of nanometers and the mask will let certain sizes of things go through. But what they're not understanding is it's not individual virus particles. It's literally a droplet that's chock full of virus. And those are much larger and the mask physically doesn't allow them in. There's other things that it does. There's magnetic repelling and some things like that it has to do with the weave of masks and things like that. But from a very simplistic standpoint, what we want to do is we want to make it as hard as possible for someone who may have the virus, who's breathing and potentially coughing or sneezing, for them to expose us to their droplets. Right? And so the best way to do that is making sure that any of our mucosal membranes are covered. So masks, ideally eyewear if you're in a crowded area, but also distancing. If I'm 30 feet from somebody and they have COVID, unless they're coughing very forcefully and expelling those droplets so that they can actually travel 30 feet, I'm not as likely to become infected. Now, what we did learn as the pandemic went on is it's not just droplets. So it's not just the big droplets that fall out of the air because of gravity, because of their weight at about 6 feet. So aerosols can stay in the air a little bit longer. The reason that's important is they're smaller and lighter, and if you're inside a building, for example, and you've got air conditioning and things like that, they can kind of hover and spread and be propagated from these processes. So we learned this through the pandemic, and so that's why the mask mandates have changed and the mask recommendations have changed on and off, in part because we learned about aerosolization. So absolutely, there is no doubt that masks work. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, Fauci and some other people were talking about we don't need to wear masks. There were two reasons. At that time, wearing a surgical mask was not, the data that we had at that time suggested that it wasn't as protective. And also, he was trying to protect healthcare workers. There was a mass shortage of masks, right? People were hoarding toilet paper. They were definitely hoarding masks, right? So the problem with that is if you should really ideally be locked down, you should be in your house and you're sitting on a stash of masks and you've got someone seeing patients and they're wearing the same mask over and over again. I mean, my colleagues were literally given one mask to wear a week. Typically, you wear a different mask with every patient. You take your mask off, and when you get a new patient, you put a new mask on. And so they were literally, it was falling apart by the end of the week. They were wearing a surgical mask over their N95, really being exposed to people who were actively sick. That is why Dr. Fauci made the recommendations he did. As soon as the data came out, that no, absolutely, everyone wearing a mask is definitely going to help with this, he changed what he said. He also changed what he said because he realized oh, right, so we're just not going to be a country that locks down. We're just not going to be New Zealand. We're not going to be Australia, right? Those countries locked down and didn't have cases for like a year, right? Australia is now in lockdown again because they went wild after a year of no deaths. We were clearly not that country. And there are many reasons for that, right? There are many, many reasons why we didn't lock down. Some people didn't have the luxury of locking down, right? We are definitely not a country that helps poor people or low-income people, right? We are a country that helps the wealthy, right? The people who could easily lock down. So there are many reasons why we did not lock down successfully, but those are sort of the complex reasons why the mask things have changed a little bit.
Yeah, that excellent explanation. And just to kind of bring it on home or bring it down to a level where a lot of people can sort of grasp this. Growing up, we all had a friend in school that would talk with food in their mouth. And you would tell them, say it, don't spray it, right? Because you realize that stuff would come flying out of their mouth. And if you were close enough to them, it was going to land on you. So what'd you do? You backed up. You like, don't get close to him when he's talking because you're going to get covered with particulate matter. So that's where the distancing comes. Stuff can only travel so far. You stay outside that zone. Those are the droplets. We also know that people who cough and don't cover their mouth are uncouth. Why? Because you've got, again, a mist coming out of your mouth and chest cavity at high velocity. And if you don't put a barrier in front of it, it's going to land on someone. Again, that's why you want a mask. And then everybody knows somebody that don't know how to use deodorant. And it's like when you have a covering and you cover them up, you are much less likely to smell them. And likewise, same thing with these aerosols. When two people are covered and have a barrier protection over their face and their mouth and nose, they're much less likely to inhale even these smaller particles. But as Dr. Naik did point out, any wet mucous membrane in the body can serve as an area where a viral particle can land and start to invade, which is why we came to realize that covering the eyes was also important in terms of preventing the transmission of that infectious agent.
Wow. So good to know. I never even thought about the eyes. And that's something that people don't really talk about either.
No, right? Yeah,
I've heard that.
But I do see people wearing face shields, even out in public. So,
and they're de rigueur in the hospital.
So the main thing, though, sorry, I just want to make clear to everyone: wearing a face shield alone is not enough. You still need to wear that mask. Because I have seen people go, "Oh, I'm wearing a face shield, now I'm protected." No, you have to, the mask and the face shield.
And somebody, okay, for the people out there who are saying, I don't know, that don't make sense to me. Okay, think about somebody blowing cigarette smoke on you. If you have a shield on, it's going to protect your eyes. But if you're breathing, it's not going to protect your lungs. That's why you need the shield over the nose and the mouth.
Okay.
Yeah, so you don't draw it in because it can travel. Yeah, around.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so I was gonna ask about like what are vaccines but y'all pretty much like have already kind of covered that. Is there anything that you didn't cover about what a vaccine does that you want to cover?
Well, yeah, Brenda, I think it's important to talk about how does our immune system protect us? What happens? So when you got, little Johnny who has lived in a bubble and finally breaks out, steps outside, and comes in contact with a cold virus that his body has never seen before, what happens? How does the immune system first recognize something foreign has invaded? Two, how does it respond? What happens during that period of responding? And how does it finally clear the agent from the body? Dr. Naik, do you think that's a good sequence to go through?
Yeah, I mean, if we've got the time, I think a lot of people misunderstand what vaccines are just based on what people are saying to me.
Right. So, and I think the key to understanding what a vaccine does is to understand how the immune system works. So, do you want me to go first? You want to go first?
No. I think you should. I think you should go first. I'll just. There's just one little analogy I'll make at the end.
Okay. So, our immune system is really organized like a country, and this is, again, these are generalizations. It's organized like the armed forces. There are different types of cells that do different functions. But the key to all of them are what are called T lymphocytes, which have the ability to recognize you versus not you. Okay. And so as the T lymphocytes are circulating around your body and they come across something that is foreign, or they come across a cell that has been infected by a foreign agent, like a virus, and is now cranking out viruses instead of, say, making hemoglobin, it says, okay, something's wrong with the cell. We got to get rid of it, and we got to get rid of whatever it's making. And then the T cell starts to send out signals to what are called B lymphocytes, which are like foot soldiers that can actually make proteins called antibodies that can recognize. So let's say we got an infectious agent that looks like this can here, and another one that looks like this mouse. Well, clearly, if you make an antibody that will latch on to this can, it's not going to latch on to that mouse. So depending on what that infectious agent looks like, the T cells literally go through a bunch of different B cells until they find one that can make an antibody that will grab up, neutralize, and crush this can. Once they find that one B cell, then they tell the rest of the B cells, okay, y'all, go back, do what you're doing, chill, calm down. But that one particular B cell, it says, manufacture 1 billion copies of yourself and crank out enough antibody to completely flood the entire body, find every copy of this AHA can, crush it, and get rid of it. Once that process has run its course and they've cleared the body of all the little copies of the AHA can, then another T cell general comes in and says, okay, we got this under control. I want 90% of y'all to essentially rest in peace. 10% of you guys will live as long as this person will live, and you will always keep a level of antibody circulating in the bloodstream so that if we ever run into another AHA can, it's immediately caught, crushed, and gotten rid of.
Wow.
That is essentially how our body responds to something. Now, there's one little twist in this. Well, there's a couple of ones, but one important one is that we have cells in our bodies that are like tattletales. They're snitches. They're macrophages. And so macrophages exist in the tissues. And so like if you cut yourself and then organism starts to invade into the tissues, their macrophages will say, you don't belong here. They will scoop it up and run and find a T cell and say, look what I found. You better sound the alarm. Get the immune system ramped up. And that's how our body polices itself to make sure we're not taken over by infectious agents, because the human body is a wonderful place for bacteria, fungi, and viruses to replicate themselves. We got food, we got warmth, we got nutrition, we got oxygen, and it's like the United States. Everybody wants to move here, but your immune system is like, no, I only want cells that belong here to be here, and that's why it's constantly policing the body to keep these infections under control and get rid of them. And again, in the process of fighting off this infection, as these cells are sending these chemical messengers to each other, or messages to each other, to ramp up, multiply, start making antibodies, those are the things that make us develop a fever. One of the classic signs of someone having a fever is chills, right? The reason people have chills is the body is telling the muscle cells, to shiver to drive up the heat, the temperature.
Wow.
Of having the chills.
Okay.
And again, the purpose of making you lose your appetite is because we all have enough stored energy. Some of us, some more than others, like me, so that we don't need to eat to get over an infection. And freely available energy can be used by bacteria and fungi just as well as can be used by your cells. So the body says, you know what? I'm good right now. I don't need to be importing any more fuel. We're going to shut down the port so that we're denying these infectious organisms readily available food while we ramp up and fight off this infection. That's why you lose your appetite.
Right.
So these symptoms we associate with being sick are actually being orchestrated by our immune system to protect us.
So what does the vaccine do in that scenario?
All right, Priya, you want to take that one?
Sure. So
sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. So, I want to back up just for a second because people have this idea that we're just born able to do all of that stuff and we're born with antibodies, right? We are not born with functioning immune systems. One of the reasons that breastfeeding is so important is because mom can pass antibodies through her breast milk to baby for the first 6 months while they're trying to develop their immune system. So a lot of people are concerned about the vaccine being something foreign that you're injecting, right? And technically that is true. However, that's literally how the immune system works. The immune system only works and develops because we're constantly exposed to foreign things, whether that's pollen or dust or viruses or bacteria. That's literally how we develop our immune systems. It's why kids who go to daycare often have more robust immune systems and don't get sick in later life compared to kids who don't go to daycare, right? Because if you're around a bunch of kids in daycare, kids are germ bombs, right? So you're just constantly exposed to stuff. You're bringing it home. Everyone in the family is getting sick. But kids are developing a strong immune system when that happens. So the only difference between a vaccine and that scenario is how you ingest the foreign substance to stimulate your immune system. So you can either inhale it, but then you get the full brunt of what you're inhaling. So in this case, the virus, which means you're getting the full genomic sequence and you're getting all of the downstream risk for it, or you inject a tiny little piece of something, just enough to irritate your immune system so that your immune system can go, foreigners attack, right? Your immune system is basically xenophobic, right? So your immune system does not want foreign things in your body. And so what the vaccines do, and different vaccines are made of different things. So the flu virus vaccine is a combination of different portions of the flu virus protein coat. So it's a little bit like if you took the elbow of the sleeve of your coat and you injected that into somebody, then now your body goes, hey, that doesn't belong here. That whole process that Dr. Mills just talked about happens, and you start to produce memory B cells that sit around that 10% of cells that will always have that memory, or at least will have that memory for a short period of time to produce antibodies if, God forbid, you are exposed to the full virus. So the vaccine in this case, there's a couple different versions of the vaccine. One version that is not yet on the market, but is likely to come on the market soon. So if you remember, I said that the way that the virus infects you is there's a spike protein that binds to our ACE2 receptor. So all of the vaccines target the spike protein in some way. So the Novavax vaccine, which is not yet approved, but is likely to be approved shortly, is literally injecting spike protein into your system. In addition to the spike protein, they inject a little bit of something called an adjuvant. So it's literally something to just irritate the crap out of your immune system to really get a super robust immune response. And that's really important because studies have shown that getting an immune response from a vaccine is more robust than getting an immune response from a natural infection, unless you're so sick you're in the ICU. That's the only way you get a super robust immune response, right? Because it's proportional, right? So if you have mild illness, you have a mild immune response to it. If you have severe illness, you have a severe immune response. But I would argue I'm going to take the vaccine and not risk kidney failure and permanent lung damage, right, to get that immune response. So the Novavax virus, as I said, injects the spike protein. The mRNA platform injects you with mRNA, which is a blueprint. So imagine if I gave you the knitting pattern to a sweater, but I don't give you the whole knitting pattern. I give you the knitting pattern for the wrist of the sleeve. That's all I'm giving you because that's the most important part. What your body does is it takes that mRNA into your system. The mRNA uses your own body's 3D printer. We all have a 3D printer in every one of our cells, okay? And what it does is it uses our 3D printer to make spike protein. So instead of injecting directly with the spike protein, we just give the body the blueprint to make the spike protein. And then that blueprint uses our 3D printer to make the spike protein. Well, now again, we have spike protein in our system. And remember, we're not supposed to have spike protein in our system, so that triggers an immune response. The AstraZeneca and the J&J are slightly different. They use something called an adenovirus vector. I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this, but essentially what we do is we use a chimpanzee adenovirus. And the reason we do that is because our immune systems are so good at recognizing the adenoviruses that infect humans that there is no way that the vector would even survive long enough on our body to then use our 3D printer and make spike protein. And that we need that amount of time. We need 4 to 7 days for all of that to happen in order to trigger our immune response. So that's why we have to use an adenovirus that we would not normally get sick with, and that's the chimpanzee one. Attached to that, again, is a little bit of a blueprint to produce the spike protein. So again, what you're being injected with is either the spike protein directly or the blueprint that your cell's 3D printers can use to make the spike protein. And the whole reason we want to do that is when you talk about getting a natural infection, your body makes antibodies to like 1,000 different things in the virus, but not all of those are important. So it's a little bit like a scattergun approach. It's a little bit less efficient, right? We want precision. And the vaccine is very precise because it produces an immune response to the main thing we want it to, which is the spike protein. Remember, until the spike protein binds to that ACE2 receptor, nothing happens. That is the key mechanism to starting the process of getting infected. That's what we want to block. So as Dr. Mills said, you want spike protein in the body, antibody production to grab it, destroy it. That's what you're trying to do. And then those cells that produce those antibodies, a couple of them, remember the firefighter analogy, they kind of go back to the station house. They're waiting around to be called to that fire. And hopefully you'll never have a fire, right? Because you're going to wear a mask and you're going to socially distance and you're going to avoid large crowds. Unfortunately, Delta is so transmissible that there are no guarantees. And if you live in the South like I do, there are fools who don't mask and think that they're immune and don't get vaccinated and all of these things. So in order to protect myself and everybody else who can't mount an immune response, these are the things that I do. But it's entirely possible that I will be exposed and I will get it. If that happens, here's the beauty of the vaccine. Because when I get the virus, that's me calling 911 saying, hey, my house is burning. I've already got firefighters sitting at the station house going, oh, cool, we're trained. We can go out and fight that fire. Now imagine if I don't have anybody sitting at the firehouse who's trained to fight this fire. It's like, oh, hang out for like 3 days while we churn out the antibodies and then we'll come fight the fire. By then, the infection is spread like wildfire and you're really sick.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a couple things Dr. Naik said that I want to just piggyback on. She talked about maternal antibodies. I just saw a study that showed that antibodies from vaccinated women cross into breast milk and will protect infants against COVID. So again, yet another reason for new mothers to be vaccinated. But the key things that I want to just sort of emphasize are, number one, the virus can invade your body in 2 ways, either by getting COVID or you can be injected with pieces of it via vaccine to train your immune system how to respond to it. So think of it like you've got a tank, an M1 Abrams tank, fully loaded, functional gun, tons of shells inside. and that thing's about to invade a foreign country and wreak havoc. Well, obviously, if a country's invaded by active, fully, armed tanks, those tanks can do a lot of damage before that country can mobilize its military to fight them off, right? Especially if they've never seen a tank before and they got to watch a couple people get blown up before they realize these things are dangerous. Mm-hmm. Well, what if you were able to make a wooden replica of a tank that looked like, and it had what looked like a gun, but it had no ammunition inside? And that would teach the nation's armed forces, when you see one of these things, attack it immediately and destroy it. Well, then you could train them on how to recognize and destroy tanks without actually exposing them to the risk of being blown up by a real tank. That's what a vaccine is. It teaches your body how to recognize and fight off an infectious agent without exposing you to the damage that can be caused by a full-blown infection. And that is what's key, and that's why vaccines are so important.
Wow.
And again, I can't emphasize enough. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say really quickly again, I want to emphasize that we know from multiple studies that the immunity that you get from vaccination lasts a little bit longer and is more robust, and again, more precise than if you're kind of trying to go the natural immunity route. Right? Because a lot of people, we're hearing in the communities, a lot of people going, well, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm not likely to get sick, so I'm just going to get I'll just get the cold and then everything will be fine and then I'll be immune. First of all, your immunity is not going to be that strong. Secondly, there's no guarantee that you're not going to be one of those people that gets long haul COVID. Third, there's no guarantee that you're going to be one of those people that gets mild disease, because Delta has changed the game. And the people that we're seeing in hospitals are young people with no other illnesses. Mm-hmm. So it is, and again, depending on the hospital you look at, between 80 and 99% of people in the ICU, and particularly on ventilators, are people who are not vaccinated.
And fifth, you just ate at Popeyes, so your immune system ain't working at all, okay? It has been knocked out by all that grease and garbage you just ingested. So yeah, you ain't as strong as you thought you were. And again, Priya, Dr. Naik is exactly right that the studies show that the immune response to the vaccines is more protective than, again, the sort of natural protection people get from being infected, which is why even when someone has had COVID and gotten over it, they are still vaccinated, like the famous Orange Orifice who used to occupy the White House. So we know that being vaccinated is super important. And Brenda's like, I can't believe it. Super important and super protective. So yes,
but you bring up such a good point. I mean, that's something that we haven't addressed yet. It is actually important. If you have been sick with COVID, we actually know that the hybrid immunity that you get from getting sick and then getting vaccinated is like the best immunity, right? I have a friend who's a physician who constantly brags about how his immune system is way better than anybody else's because he had mild COVID early on and then got vaccinated. The other reason it's important to vaccinate is if you got sick like in January or April or last year, you were not sick with Delta. Yes. So getting vaccinated is hugely important. We know the vaccine is not as efficacious against Delta as it is against Alpha and the other variants, but it's still highly efficacious. Depending on which vaccine you're talking about, as high as 88% efficacy, right, with Pfizer. That is nothing to sneeze at. When we made the vaccines, we were hoping for 60% efficacy. So 88% efficacy is really important. And when we talk about efficacy, I don't know if we were going to go into this, so stop me if this is a question that's coming up. But it's important for people to know that the vaccine was never intended to prevent people from getting infected. The goal of the vaccine, and it is highly successful at doing this, is to prevent severe illness, hospitalization, and death. And it is doing that. So this is important. This is why we still need to be wearing masks, right? Even if we're vaccinated. Because theoretically, I could pick up a little bit of a cold, I could pick up the COVID, and I might have just a couple, maybe a couple days, maybe even just a couple hours before my immune system destroys it. But if I'm just sort of walking around doing whatever and I'm breathing on people, I can breathe those viruses out at someone who may not be vaccinated, or who may be vaccinated but doesn't have a good immune response, right? Because they're on steroids, or they have a lung transplant or something like that, right? So or they're a child who can't be vaccinated, right? So in order to protect kids and people who are immunocompromised, we should all still be wearing masks.
And let me just jump in, because I just did a in-service for employees at the Census Bureau across the country on Delta virus. When I did the research for it, I was blown away, because people say, well, why is Delta such a problem? Because studies show that people infected with Delta have 11 times more virus in their bodies than people who had the original COVID variant. 11 times. So basically, you are a Vesuvius of virus, just, spreading it out. And it looks like the Delta variant is more virulent, meaning it causes more severe disease. So number one, you're more likely to come in contact with a lot more of it, so that once you're going to get like an overwhelming load. And that stuff is gangster. It is really serious and will do a number on your body. It's nothing to play with. And I just want to echo what Dr. Naik said. I can tell you, at the hospital I work at over in Virginia, probably, I don't have absolute numbers, but every COVID patient that I have seen over the last several weeks has been unvaccinated. We're not seeing vaccinated people. It is the unvaccinated who are getting sick and coming in and being admitted.
Wow.
So, yeah, these little questions we came up with, we're just gonna, because y'all are just blowing through.
I'm so sorry.
I mean, y'all are just like blowing through everything, and like, so I think we can just because people are out here spreading information about like, oh, it's changing your genes and all this stuff, and like all this, the vaccines are changing your genes and stuff. And I think you, Dr. Knight, addressed some of that. But Jamila, I think we can go right into the question about just like the hesitancy, that certain communities may have. So did you want to go ahead and ask that question?
Absolutely. So let me see if I can find it right quick. Where is it at? Okay, great. So what do you think is the root cause of vaccine hesitancy in Black and Brown communities?
Yeah, let me step up to the plate on that one, because I'll be honest, I'm tired of hearing about the Tuskegee experiment, okay? And the reason I'm tired of hearing about it is not because it wasn't real, not because it wasn't serious, but because people are using that as an excuse to act stupid, okay? Most people don't even understand what happened in the Tuskegee experiment. They have it in their minds that the government was injecting people with syphilis and then just killing them all. And that is not what happened. Tuskegee happened when men and women who were seeking treatment for syphilis were lied to and told that they were getting treated, but they weren't. So they were never injected with anything. They were simply, and this was, again, it was horrible. It was inexcusable. But they were observed, and the syphilis was allowed to run its course. Yes, that was cruel. It was wrong. It was disgusting, but it did happen. But it also happened like almost 90 years ago. Okay, a lot of ground has been covered since then. Now, that is not to say that when people of color interact with our healthcare system, that they don't have bad experiences. Because I know they do. I see it in the hospital. I see the treatment that people of color get. So I know that there is some hesitancy, some skepticism, but you can't let hesitancy and skepticism make you stupid. So again, an analogy I've used with people is, we all know that GM, Ford, car makers around the world have put out some absolute death traps over the years. Okay, it's like getting a Pinto, and the thing might explode just because you turn the key. You know, there are cars that, you know, the brakes lock up, the things, you know, break in just when you're driving, but we all still drive. Why? Because we try to make sure we do enough, and so we don't drive because we think that Ford, GM, Chrysler, Chevrolet has our best interest at heart, because we know they're just trying to make money. So we have to make sure that when we buy a car, that we're buying one that is safe, okay, and that is dependable, and then that we operate it responsibly. Likewise, it's appropriate to have skepticism about the medical field, but we also know that the medical profession does a lot of good. And I know good well anybody that's listening to this podcast, if you drive to the store and get in an accident and break your leg, you're not going to tell them to take you home and sit you on the porch. You're going to tell them to take you to the hospital to get that fixed, because we know that the medical profession is capable of doing good. So skepticism is one thing, but not to the point of letting it cause you to kill yourself. So what do you do when it comes to these issues of, well, I have questions about, you know, is it safe? Is it efficacious? Damn it, look at the healthcare professionals that look like you, that have shown a commitment to your community and that care about you. And if they're telling you, look, like I am fully vaccinated. I have got my family fully vaccinated. My mother is turning 88 in November. She's vaccinated. These vaccines are safe and they are effective at protecting your health. So you don't have to trust the medical profession, but you can trust me as a stand-in for the medical profession. And I'm telling you, please get vaccinated. It will save your life.
Powerful.
You know, I just want to make one comment real quick, and that is that it is inexcusable that there are physicians and nurses and other people out there who will spread disinformation, and that's adding to the hesitancy, right? Because if you are somebody who is already hesitant, it's natural that you're going to gravitate towards people that are talking to the fears that you already have. And the problem is that those people are lying, and they're saying things like, no, don't get the vaccine, it's dangerous. Here, I conveniently have a cocktail that I can give you. And, you know, they're like, I've been accused of taking money from pharmaceutical companies for making recommendations. I mean, you can look me up on Open Secrets, openpayments.cms.gov. There are like 4 payments in there because drug companies keep putting down that I'm at lunches that I'm not at because they never have vegan food, and hospitals I haven't worked at since 2013. But you know, but you can look people up. And so they'll say things like, oh, you're a shill for pharma. And I'm like, okay, but the person that's prescribing these unproven therapies to you, they're getting a consultation fee, right? They have a vested interest in convincing you of this stuff, right? They're selling a book. They're trying to convince you that their supplements are going to prevent you from having this, right? Their supplements, like you should buy their stuff, right? So that's the frustration to me, is that on top of very natural and understandable fears within Black and brown communities, people are preying on that. And these are people that have, you know, MDs and things like that. And thankfully, those people can be reported to the medical board, and the medical board can suspend their license. And so I've done that. I've reported a couple of physicians for spreading nonsense because it's really dangerous. We already know that Black and brown communities are disproportionately being affected by this disease. And these vaccines are very safe. I want to say one thing very quickly. When we say safe, we say it in the same way that we say seatbelts are safe, right? Because a lot of people will go, okay, but you can get Guillain-Barré and you can get these things. And I'm like, yes, you can. There are very, very, very rare side effects. In the history of vaccinology, if you're going to get a side effect from a vaccine, it's going to happen in the first 8 weeks. It is not going to happen 6 years from now, right? If you get cancer 6 years from now, it's likely related to your diet, your lack of exercise, your smoking exposure, right? There are many other reasons you might get cancer in 6 years. It's not that vaccine, right? Right, exactly. So Well, but like for someone like me, if I get cancer in 5 years, I'm fully vaccinated. I'm going to assume it's because I didn't live a vegan life my whole life, right? I wasn't exercising like I should my whole life. So I have other reasons why I might get cancer in 5 years. It's not the shot, right? But the thing that is hard, I think, for people is when they're getting all of this mixed information from people that have vested interests in harming you. I have an agenda. I will fully admit it. My agenda is I would like people to stop dying. I would like healthcare workers to stop dying and committing suicide because of, overwhelming trauma and PTSD. I would like to know that if I get into a car accident, I'm not going to be sitting in a hall spot in the ER because they don't have a place for me because they've shut the ORs down because they've had to convert them to ICUs, right? So that's my agenda, right? Like doctors are dying, nurses are dying, they're leaving the field. We don't have enough care. They're discharging people with stage 4 cancer because they don't have beds for them, because they need to make room for people with COVID, right? These are real things that are happening. So that's my agenda, right? Like I will fully admit I have an agenda when it comes to vaccines. But it's very important that people understand that there is no amount of I'm eating a whole food plant-based diet, I'm taking all the supplements that physically prevents the spike protein from binding to the ACE2 receptor. Let me tell you, if there was, I'd be screaming it from the rooftops because what an amazing way that would be to get people to go plant-based.
And I want to be clear that the internet is great for some things. It's a great place to find free porn. It's a great place to order greasy food at 12 midnight. It's a great place to order socks from, Istanbul. It is a lousy place to find medical advice, okay? Because you have got people who don't know what they're talking about making pronouncements like they have, graduated from medical school. And to touch on something Dr. Naik said about these unproven therapies, I will show you my vaccination card, show you that I got vaccinated. Somebody's trying to tell you to take horse dewormer or a malarial drug or inject, tell them, take it in front of me before you recommend it to me, okay? Because these people are recommending these unproven, dangerous so-called treatments, which aren't even treatments, because again, as Dr. Nye pointed out, many of them have a financial stake in the companies that make this garbage, but they themselves are not doing it. Just like we have found out over and over again, these governors of the southern states are telling people not to take the vaccine when they themselves have been vaccinated. It's disgusting. It's evil, and all I have to say is they will have to deal with God for the deaths and suffering that they have caused. But I am willing to back up anything that I recommend to somebody else. And I will point out, I never recommended getting vaccinated until I was fully vaccinated, because I wanted to be able to tell people, I'm not telling you to do something I haven't done, and I've done it and I'm fine, and you'll be fine too.
Nice.
One last thing I want to mention is at the beginning of the pandemic, we heard a lot about vaccine hesitancy. We did not hear about vaccine access, right? And that is still a real problem. Vaccine apartheid locally within the United States, but globally is a real problem. So you had wealthy white people in New England going into poor Black and brown communities, taking their spots to get the vaccine.
We had that here in Maryland.
Yeah. So, it's unfortunately, we have seen that, you had to get online, right, to book your appointment. Well, if you live in a community that's marginalized and you don't have great internet access, and those 3,500 slots at the health department fill in 15 minutes, which is what happened here, how are you going to get online, right, to book that spot, right?
Or if you're 8 years old, like my mother. Yeah.
Right. Like you literally have white people coming in and taking those spots, right? To me, that says you should trust it, right? But the other issue is that we also need to talk about global vaccine apartheid. I don't know, because I came in late, I don't know if you guys talked about variants, but unless we get the global population vaccinated, we are going to see more variants, and all the vaccines in the world that we take will not mean as much if a new variant pops up that makes our vaccine less effective.
Yes.
And we can talk about variants if we haven't, but I didn't know if you've already talked about that.
No, we didn't. Not in any significant way.
So
Yeah,
in a nutshell, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that was one of the next questions, like what exactly is a variant? And then also, why is the variant affecting children in a way that that the other forms of the virus didn't?
If it's okay, I'll answer the first part, and then Dr. Mills, do you want to take the question about why is it affecting kids?
I mean, as best I can. I mean, not being a pediatrician,
Yeah.
my essentially, as the virus has become more virulent, its ability to attack children has, I don't want to use the word improved, but increased. And so the version of the virus, which is what variant is a version of the original virus that is prevalent now, is better able to invade and attack children than the original version or variant. And that is why children are getting sick now, whereas they were more resistant before.
I wonder if it has to do with viral load, since we know that you're getting,
That's
like
another
up to
good point.
1,000 times more copies, and we know that the more copies you have of the virus, the sicker you are, in part because the virus can do more damage, but in part also because now your immune system is like, what the hell is going on, and is really freaking out and really going after things aggressively, right? But that can cause organ damage. So to talk about variants, in a nutshell, a variant is, as Dr. Mills said, just a different version. It's a mutation. So remember, we talked about blueprints, right? So if you think of the genomic sequence of the virus as a blueprint, and you change something in the blueprint in some way, and I'll explain why that happens in a second, that can translate to a lot of different versions or mutations. A lot of the time, that mutation means nothing. Viruses mutate all the time. And most of the time, it doesn't really mean anything. But every once in a while, you'll get a mutation in a key portion of the blueprint that results in a really key change. So the variants that we're seeing, alpha, lambda, delta, all of these variants are causing changes in the part of the blueprint that codes for the spike protein. So it's causing a slight change to the shape of the spike protein. And remember, our antibodies are very specific, right? Dr. Mills did a great job of explaining you can't have an antibody to the cup match the antibody to the mouse, right? So if you change the shape just even the slightest bit, it can make it so that the antibody doesn't attack it as easily or as well, right? Which can lead to more severe illness, and it can make it more transmissible. So think of the virus just like you would think of making copies. So what the virus's entire goal is to get into your cells, use your cell's machinery to make copies. That's all it wants to do, and then spread. That's literally its entire goal. But just like anything else, the copying process is imperfect. So if you were to take a document and you were to go to a Xerox machine and say, I'm going to make 10,000 copies of this article, you're not going to get 10,000 exact copies. You're going to have a smudge on one. It might drop off a couple letters on another one. There's going to be imperfections. So the more often a virus has an opportunity to spread between people, and therefore replicate more often, make more copies, the more likely you are to see these imperfect copies, right? And eventually, one of those imperfect copies is going to be deadly, and that's what we're seeing with Delta. This is, if you look at everywhere a variant popped up, they all popped up in areas that had one thing in common. They did not have high rates of vaccination in those populations. If you don't have high rates of vaccination in your population, then you can spread the virus more frequently. So I'm going to geek out here a little bit for anybody who's into sci-fi. There's a show called Stargate SG-1, and there's a bad guy on the show called the Goa'uld, and they're a parasitic race, and they take over the body as a host. And there's actually a plot in one season where they decide, you know what, we're just gonna get rid of all the humans. If you get rid of all the humans, then the Goa'ulds they have no host, so they can't replicate, they can't cause havoc in the universe. So without killing us, the purpose of the vaccine is to make us incredibly inhospitable to the virus. If we are not hospitable, if we make it harder for us to pick up the infection and have high rates of copying and have spread over a long period of time, right? Because even if you do get sick and you're vaccinated, you're sick with milder symptoms and you're sick for a shorter period of time. So you have less chance of spreading it. You have less chance of the virus making thousands of little copies within you and mutating. So that is one of the key things that a vaccine does. So if you look at places like India and Brazil and the UK and South Africa, when these variants popped up, they did not have high vaccination rates. Now, some people will spread disinformation. They'll say, no, India was conducting vaccine trials. The UK was conducting vaccine trials. That's true. So were we. We've had more vaccine trials happening in the US than really anywhere else. We have not seen a variant here. Why? Because we got our vaccines up and running a little bit better, right? Initially, we were very slow, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but we know why we were very slow, right? Yeah. We got a new administration and everything ramped up, right? So the problem, and this goes back to what I was saying about global vaccine apartheid, right? We sent 1.5 million doses of vaccine to Africa, and everybody cheered. And I'm like, there are over 1 billion people on that continent.
When you're saying we, are you talking about India?
No, I'm sorry. I'm talking about the U.S. The U.S. government sent 1.5 million doses, right? And we can talk about how India's health crisis became so bad. The Serum Institute of India has produced between 50 and 70% of the world's vaccines. And in the midst of their humanitarian crisis, they still had to fill their orders. They were not allowed to stop and pivot and start making vaccine for their own people that were dying in the tens of thousands. It took about 3 months before they were able to start producing vaccine for their own people, right? So this is why the vaccine, this is why the virus burned through the population, right? Which are coming down now. Why? Because of two things. They isolated, they locked down, and they got vaccinated, right? So this is why we need people in Africa and Haiti and South Asia and Southeast Asia to get vaccines. I hope that people care about other people in other parts of the world. Yeah. But even if you don't care about other people in other parts of the world, their lack of vaccines affects us because we're going to see another variant pop up in one of these countries because the virus can spread unabated.
And then, so I remember you saying earlier, Dr. Naik, that the vaccine was never meant to keep people from getting the virus, but to make it so that your symptoms were less and there was less severe symptoms and death. Because somebody was asking, like, well, why is it that when you have the vaccine, you can still get the variant? Mm-hmm. And you did address that earlier, but can you just tell folks again, like why that is possible?
Can I take that one?
Sure.
Because again, this is the original variant. You make an antibody that recognizes this, grabs onto it, crushes it, gets rid of it. But as Dr. Naik was saying, if you allow that virus in various different factories or people to keep cranking out copies, eventually you're going to get a can that's shaped like a bottle. And when that happens, that antibody can't latch on as effectively. And if you get one of those bottle variants, you're going to start to have bottles floating around through your system. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's so important to get everybody vaccinated, to get rid of this can so it doesn't have the opportunity to change shape into a bottle.
That just makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it really does.
Thank you. Wow. So, there was so much jumping around and like questions were being answered that hadn't even been asked yet, which I definitely appreciate. This has had such a wonderful flow to it. I just wanted to, and if that's okay with you, Jamila, to try to go ahead and wrap it up.
Can we touch on one thing first? Because I have heard too many vegans say, well, I'm plant-based. And the studies show that plant-based populations are less likely to get infected or have severe disease. So I'm good. No, you're not. Yes, the studies show that you're less likely. Just like I can tell you, if you're in a car with seatbelts, your chance of dying in an accident are reduced by maybe 50%. You add airbags, it's reduced by 70 to 75%. Yeah, the crumple zone, maybe you get another 5%, but it's never zero. And it's the same thing with being plant-based. It does help your immune system be more robust. It does offer some protection, but that protection isn't absolute. So you need the layer of the protection of having trained your immune system to recognize these virus particles so that you never get an infection established in your body. And with being plant-based and having a more aggressive, robust immune system that's already trained on how to recognize and fight off COVID, yeah, you're going to be, much, much, much less likely to either get infection or severe illness. But again, that's less than zero. Like I tell people say, well, look, people who had the vaccine, they still die. Yes, there are people who, can y'all still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, because my computer just freaked out on me for a minute. There are people who are driving in some of the best cars in the world, Rolls-Royce, which has really solid body, very good seat belts, and very good airbags. But if you drive that Rolls-Royce into a telephone pole at 120 miles an hour, you're still gonna die. Okay, and depending on what kind of comorbid conditions, in other words, what other chronic health problems that person had, what they may have been doing in their life, they can still, unfortunately, succumb if they have enough other issues going on that weaken their ability to fight off this infection. So again, we have to remember these things are not absolute. They're maximizing your chances of survival, and we need all those layers, not just one.
Somebody
And
said,
there's
so
no
will the
guarantee.
entire... Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, there's no guarantee. If you're one of those plant-based eaters that has mild disease, there's no guarantee you're not going to get long-haul COVID.
Thank you.
Right? So I mean, the goal here should not be to try to get the virus or to assume that you're going to have mild disease. I mean, as a plant-based eater who eats whole foods, I still don't want to get COVID because I really do not want to worry that I'm not going to know how to turn on my computer or do my work or do a physical exam on someone or do a procedure on someone, right? These are skills that it took me a long time to learn. I don't want to lose them. If it's okay, I know we're wrapping up, I just wanted to mention two things very quickly. We didn't really address the myths surrounding PCRs and what the FDA and the CDC are doing. I know that we've been running for quite some time, so if we don't have time to address that, I actually addressed that on a podcast with the Bearded Vegans, and so you can go listen to that, and I address exactly what the CDC and the FDA are talking about when they talk about PCR. The other thing I wanted to mention is, I don't know, because again, I joined late. Did you guys talk about fertility? Because I'm getting a lot of questions about fertility. And I wanted to address the fact, so if it's okay and we've got some time, I want to address this. So here's what we know about fertility, women and men. In women, there's been concerns about fertility because some guy who worked at Pfizer for a brief period of time, not a doctor, was concerned that there's the gene sequence for the spike protein is similar to a protein on the placenta. But here's what he's not at all paying attention to. The gene sequence is not as important in this case as the shape of the protein, right? So again, there are enough differences in that blueprint that when the protein shape takes hold, the protein shape is totally different in the placenta than it is in the spike protein. So there's no cross-reactivity. Your antibodies that you produce do not attack the placenta, okay?
Or
so
the
that's
ovaries.
Point number one. Or the ovaries. Point number two is, if you get sick with COVID and that's your theoretical worry, even though it shouldn't be a worry, you're gonna definitely still have antibodies, right, to the spike protein. So this is not something you need to worry about. When it comes to women's periods, we have seen reports of women who are struggling with irregular menstruation. So they might have heavier periods, it might come early, it might come late, they might miss a period, things like that. And there's been concerns then that might translate to poor decreased fertility. And what we actually know is that we're seeing temporary changes. Now, could those be related to the fact that when you get a vaccine, your immune system is revved up? That's literally the goal of the vaccine, right, is to rev up the immune system. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that a woman would have temporary changes to her period. Again, they are temporary. We don't see them more than 2 to 3 months. What we do know is that women are not having trouble getting pregnant with the vaccine. How do we know that? Well, in the trials themselves, when you conduct a trial for a vaccine that's new, you actually make the participants sign forms that say that they will be heterosexually abstinent or they will use 2 forms of birth control because we don't want them to get pregnant, right? The goal of a vaccine trial is to make sure that the vaccine is safe in a healthy adult because we haven't determined yet what's going to happen if people are having babies. People still got pregnant in the trials. Like lots of people got pregnant in the trials. They've had the babies, they've carried them to term, there's been no problems. Since then, we've given over 170 million people are now fully vaccinated, right? In the US alone, 1.08 billion people worldwide have been fully vaccinated, right? We are not seeing changes in women's ability to get pregnant. Here's what we are seeing. If a woman has COVID, she is much more likely to get very, very sick and die, right? She will form blood clots. If she is pregnant, we see increased rates of miscarriages. We see increased rates of pregnancy complications. If mom is severely sick with COVID, baby is definitely at risk, right? So we're seeing women dying in the ICU and babies being born premature because you're desperately trying to save the baby because you know you can't save mom. These are real things that are happening to unvaccinated pregnant women. The other thing that we know is that men who have COVID, whether it's mild or severe, have drops in their sperm motility and sperm counts after a bout of COVID. We do not see that with the vaccine. We're also seeing higher rates of erectile dysfunction in men after they get COVID, not the vaccine. Final point I'll make is a small study that was very intriguing that showed that when you looked at women's ovaries after getting the vaccine and you examined the follicles, which is where the eggs are, perfectly healthy, beautiful follicles, no evidence of spike protein in there. Simply the only thing they found was antibody to the spike protein, which you would expect. You should see antibody to the spike protein everywhere if you've been vaccinated. So if you've been vaccinated and you get an ultrasound of your ovaries are healthy.
Can I just hit the take-home message? If you get COVID, you're going to get erectile dysfunction, so get vaccinated, okay?
Okay.
And so all the men are calling their doctors right now. All right?
There was one question from someone who is a viewer who says, so will the entire world just need to be getting vaccinated every 8 to 12 months every year from here on out? Like, is this what life is now?
We don't know. Let's hope not, but we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the hope is that if we can rapidly get everyone vaccinated, we achieve global herd immunity. The virus just becomes something that is minor and that in pockets might cause a couple outbreaks, but isn't something major. And again, remember, once we make the world inhospitable to the virus, it loses its teeth, right? It's not replicating and creating these really dangerous, highly infectious variants. So our hope is that it becomes something more like the flu, where maybe you get a shot once a year or once every 2 years.
Okay. So we have one final question. Jamila, did you want to ask the final question that we have for both of them?
All right. And I think y'all touched on this before, but we would definitely want to hear y'all's opinion on this. So if you had your wish, how would people be conducting themselves during this pandemic?
Like best case scenario.
Okay. All right. So in other words, if my fairy godfather came down and said, you can have what you want, everybody would be plant-based, because that is going to give you not only the best chance of fighting off COVID, but also other infections, but even more importantly, chronic disease, dementia, disability. People would get vaccinated. And until we reached that stage where the majority of people were vaccinated and we really saw cases down at, closer near zero, we would use our masks and social distancing when we're out and about. That would be what I want.
Dr. Knight?
Yeah, so I'll echo that. Yeah, I mean, so one, obviously being plant-based helps not only because, as Dr. Mills said, there are now 3 studies that I've seen. One is in preprint. One has been 2 have been published that showed they're not robust studies, which is why I don't talk about them aggressively. They're not prospective, randomized, double-blind controlled trials. But they do indicate that if you're plant-based, you're less likely to have a severe case. Now, again, as we've already said, that's not enough, right? It's not seatbelts or airbags. It's both, right? So eating plant-based, yes. Vax, mask, socially distance. I honestly, if I'm being honest, I think we need to lock down for 4 solid weeks. But I think that has to be, that we can't just lock down, especially in a country like the US where we don't help anybody do anything. So we can only do that if we have universal basic income, if we have health insurance, if we have childcare, if we have all of these things and we were able to lock down. In my perfect world, that's what would happen, because then there is no spread. How do I know that? We saw that in Wuhan. They did a study of like 10 million people that showed almost no spread in Wuhan because they aggressively locked down.
Wow.
Right? So in my perfect world, we have universal basic income, we have universal health care, we have universal child care, we have the ability for people to be at home if they need to be at home because now their kids are at home to protect the kids, right? Everybody would be getting vaccinated, including children, because we would have proven it safe and be vaccinating young children as well. Everybody would be plant-based. That would be my dream.
And let me just tack on. We saw how effectively lockdowns worked with the Ebola virus, which is like way more deadly. But we put the kibosh on that because we jumped on it so quickly and so effectively. And if only we would do the same thing here, we could have been through this mess already.
Well, we've seen it in New Zealand, right? New Zealand, Australia, Singapore. These countries locked down. I mean, people go, well, so there's 2 things that people ask me often. What would have happened if we locked down? We don't need to imagine it. We can see it. We saw it in countries that have universal health care and that have access to things like universal basic income, right? We don't need to imagine it. We've seen it. The other question I get asked is, well, what's the problem? What if we just let it run its course? We also don't need to imagine that. That's what happened in India. Right? We've seen real world examples of what happens when a virus runs through a population uncontrolled before they have an opportunity to get it under control.
Right. Very true. Very true.
Well, this has been so enlightening, and I have just learned so much. I don't know about you, Jamila.
My brain is full to bursting from everything y'all just said right now. I feel so informed. I love it.
Brenda, you're going to post this, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
this
because
will be everywhere.
I would love to be able to refer people to.
Oh yeah.
To this. First of all, thank you for doing this. It is so.
Thank you.
Necessary and so important, and to have it done in a way that is directed to and for and by our community of color. And now I have something I can refer people to. It's like, look, just watch this. Okay?
Yes.
Just watch it and do everything that you hear and stop talking about becoming magnetic, because I don't
If it is okay, I do just want to say, like I said, the one thing that we didn't answer, and in the interest of time, I don't know that we need to rehash it, but if you have questions about PCR and what the CDC and the FDA are saying, I answer this question in my podcast with the
Can we post a link to that podcast too, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure.
And I mean, is it something that you can, just kind of, is it like, it can be like condensed, or is it like,
Oh yeah. I mean, I sure. Yeah. So in essence, there are a lot of rumors from some very prominent people who do not know what they're talking about, who keep saying PCRs were never designed for viruses. There's a lot of things that we do in medicine that are repurposed in the world, right? Velcro was not designed for shoes, and yet we use it in shoes, right? So we repurpose things all the time. Remdesivir is a drug that was designed for Ebola, and we're using it with this virus. So the fact that something wasn't designed to do something doesn't mean anything. We use PCR all the time. All it does is amplify genetic material. That's all it does. So where do we use it? We use it to measure viral loads in someone who has HIV. We use it to measure in the lung transplant world. I used it to measure CMV, RSV and EBV when I was treating someone because I wanted to make sure that their symptoms were getting better, there were lower signs of lung rejection, and their viral loads were dropping. So we're using it here to, first of all, see if someone is positive, right? That's how we're using it for COVID. And there's been two things that have been confusing to people. So the FDA, and I will fully admit the FDA did a really dumb job on their website. They put on their website PCR not to be used any longer. And that's literally what it says. And so a lot of people are jumping on that going, see, we told you PCR was never meant to be used to test for SARS-CoV-2 virus. If you actually look at the website, what they're saying is there are a handful of labs that were originally given approval to run the PCR test to test for SARS-CoV-2. On subsequent FDA audits, they did not pass the audits, and they didn't fix the problems quickly enough. So the FDA said, you know what, you're not doing this well, we're not going to allow you to do it anymore. It's no different than if the health department came in and said, your kitchen is disgusting, we're shutting you down until you fix it, right? In this case, they're not shutting the whole lab down because this is the only thing they're not doing well. Everything else they're doing fine. So that's one thing that's come up. The other thing that's come up is the CDC has petitioned the FDA to phase out the current PCR test that's used. So again, people are going, see, we told you, you're not supposed to use PCR for COVID. That's not at all what the CDC is saying. So we're coming into flu season, right? So someone comes into the ER and they've got a little bit of cold symptoms, maybe a fever, they might be a little short of breath, they might have some spots on their lung that look like a pneumonia. At this point, I have no idea as the doctor. Dr. Mills has no idea. Is this influenza? And if it is it influenza A or B? Is it para-influenza? Is it RSV? Is it human metapneumovirus? Is it para-influenza? I mean, there's a ton of different viruses it could be. Or is it SARS-CoV-2, i.e. COVID-19? So how do we test for that right now? Currently, we have to do one nasal swab, right? The really obnoxious test. We do that for COVID-19. Then we do either one or two additional ones to look for flu and then the extended respiratory panel. So theoretically, a patient could have to have 3 separate tests in their nose, and now the doctor has to wait on 3 separate tests before they can decide what treatment to initiate, right? So all the CDC is saying is, hey, this makes no sense. We have a great assay. It's called a multiplex assay, meaning we can do multiple tests on this one thing. And now if we use this test, and if we have the FDA approve the test because we've run all the quality control and it works and it's a really good test, and we've proven that it's a really good test, we would like that to be allowed. One of the jobs of the FDA is to make sure any new tests that are used in humans, any new devices, including things that are used for lab tests, are approved by them as being efficacious and safe. So all the CDC is saying is, hey, please take a look at this, because now if you approve this, if a patient comes in that scenario, we can do one nasal swab, which is far less obnoxious for the patient. And it's far less irritating for the doctor because now the doctor is waiting on one test to come back, not 3. That's literally all that's being said. And unfortunately, people who don't have clinical context or people who have a vested interest in spreading misinformation and disinformation are saying, see, PCR should not be used for testing. And that is completely false.
Okay. Wow, that was condensed. Thank you for explaining that for all the folks who may have had some questions about that. And thank you so much to both of you for being a part of this. I mean, this is an amazing experience, and so many people became more informed, and hopefully folks will share this out. We certainly will share this out, and we know that both of your time is very valuable, so it's just such an honor that you would come and spend it with us and you know, disseminating this very important information. So thank you so much.
Yes, we're so grateful for you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I love working with Priya because she always plays good cop to my bad cop.
I mean, you know, I wouldn't say bad cop. You know,
well, I would say
cop,
frustrated cop. I would say frustrated cop.
Tell it like it is, cop.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
And thank you.
It was an honor to be here.
Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you everyone for watching.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
Take care.